What's going on, everybody? This is James Graham, Master Facts Boyce, and you are here for another Facts Project podcast. Today, I am here talking with Christopher Rhodes. We are here to talk about his comic book 10, now in its first volume, and 10 Max, issues 2 and 3. Thank you for being here, sir.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for tonight.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Now, if I was looking into a lot of things that basically created the comic, what is it? What is it that we know as 10? And all this basically came upon the creation that was not given amongst your idea, but amongst your 10-year-old son, correct?
Yeah, this project has been really cool, right? And we have these two lines going on. We have 10, which is the main line I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years. And along the way, if you start writing a comic, your kid, who was probably like 5 or 6 at the
Oh
time, is
yeah.
gonna want to get involved. He's been pitching ideas, coming up with characters and whatnot. And eventually we're like, you know what? Let's give you your own line. And that's how kind of 10 Max came into, which is our second line, kind of like our ultimates or our absolute kind of line, written by him, my now 11-year-old, and illustrated by some cool folks and everything like that.
Excellent. Excellent. Now it's aside from both universes, how they basically came to collaborate as one. What inspired you outside of this to just create this universe in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. It really started all the way back in 2020, which, obviously was a very eventful year in a whole lot of ways.
Yep.
We're all sitting at home at that point. And, I start to look around and I'm like, I'm a lifelong superhero fan. It's escapism, it's fantasy and whatnot. But what if we actually had some of these characters in our world? If we
Hmm.
had superheroes, like with the kind of stuff that we have, the kind of stuff that maybe punching and blasting and flying doesn't necessarily solve. Could those types of characters make a difference for the stuff that we deal with? Would they make it better? Would they make it worse? And so on. And so that was kind of really the genesis of this idea. And, you know, telling some really cool superhero stories along the way. I'm sitting there as a fan and I'm like, what are some superhero stories that I haven't seen yet that I would like to see? And
Yeah.
so it's hit off from there.
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about the premise of the comic itself, if you think about it, it's kind of like a case of natural selection. The premise of aliens granting powers to just 10 people around the world can be awfully intriguing. Now, where did that idea originate?
Yeah, so that came from a couple different sources. With these kind of superhero stories, you need some kind of explanation. Where are these characters coming from? Are they from
Mhm.
another world? Are they mutants? Are they, whatever? And this idea of aliens, I think, was very much kind of, in the atmosphere at the time. I grew up with X-Files and all those kind of stories.
Yeah.
Independence Day, the movie, was a big inspiration. When you see the ships coming down out of the sky for the first time and everything.
Hmm.
And I thought about those kind of stories. And it's like, what if instead of invading or destroying cities or whatever you see in the movies, what if the aliens came to us with a deal? Um, Hey, we have the technology, we can grant these powers. You pick 10 people, we give them the powers, y'all, Earth, you run with it. Um, what do we do? Who
Yeah.
would get those powers? How do we decide amongst ourselves? And what would people do? What
Yeah.
would you or I do if all of a sudden we were Superman? We were one of these characters with these amazing abilities. And so all that kind of mixed together, and it came up with the premise of this work.
Yeah. Also, even in the context of like pretty much in the beginning with the 10 people, nobody knows each other. So everybody's pretty much scattered. How does, of course, with the progression of the series, everybody starts to get to know each other a little bit better. You come to find out that there's not only just one of us, there's actually a lot more of us. Now, why 10 heroes instead of one, or maybe like an entire superpower population?
Yeah, I think 10, it was a nice round number.
Mhm.
Yes, I like team books. I like Avengers. I like X-Men. I grew up with X-Men. That was my entry into comic books and everything. Those
Yeah.
teams back in the 90s were huge. Um, and so, I wanted enough characters to kind of bounce off each other. And another thing that was kind of in the background was this idea of, I'm an academic in my day job.
Okay.
And, one of my heroes is W.B. Du Bois. And so this idea of a talented 10th kind of was there, right?
Hmm.
And in some ways, these 10 heroes are kind of a metaphor for that, right? Like they're this subset of humanity that now are excelling. And the idea is, do they pull the rest of us up
Yeah.
with them, or do they go off and kind of do their own thing? And so, from that idea, the talent 10, 10, I think, really rings on that kind of metaphorical level. In addition to being like, a good dynamic for just a superhero story.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, I always ask people when they're doing team books, it's got to be difficult because you're dealing with multiple personalities that you have to create. Did you now, if you could introduce us to the entire 10, and also did you create biographies or histories as to where each of their origins come from?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a whole backstory
Yep.
for each of these, and the first 10 issues basically of the comic, each one is essentially introducing one of these heroes and kind of focuses on a different one. So you get either their backstory or you get some adventure that kind of illustrates who they are,
Hmm.
and it's a wide assortment of people again from all over the world. I really thought of it almost like the United Nations, right? Where you have the distribution of power in the world, and so if you get this new resource, its new weapon almost, and stuff, which countries are gonna take a stake, which countries are gonna claim like, oh, we have to have one of these people, from
Right.
our country, from our group. And then how would they all interact with each other? What is the American hero going to do with the Russian hero? What is, the Chinese hero going to do with the Japanese hero, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Um, I'm kind of like a very like, I try to be a very meticulous person. I even have like a spreadsheet somewhere on my computer with like a grid of all these characters, right? To kind of lay out, how does this character relate to this character and whatnot. And you start to feel those relationships as you go through the stories.
True, true. Now, if you could introduce the 10 characters, just
Oh,
basically
absolutely.
our 10 superheroes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me give the rundown. Yeah. So we start off with our hero, Peacekeeper. So he's the
Mhm.
American hero. And he has a really interesting backstory. He's a black Navy veteran who was chosen to be the American hero. He's basically like the Superman of the 10 universe.
Mhm.
And our first issue kicked off with some adventures with him. And what he's doing outside of America and what he's doing in the country.
Mhm.
Um, we go from there to Brazil, and we have a superheroine, a character named Iris. Um, and she not only is a superhero, but she's like a media mogul.
Mhm.
Um, the way I describe it is, if you imagine someone like Rupert Murdoch or somebody who has this huge media empire, but is also a superhero, right? Which means
Right,
that
right.
not only does she have powers, but she has information.
Yeah.
In some
His
ways,
influence.
she has influence. In some ways, that can be even more powerful than punching through a wall.
Hmm.
Um, we have in Japan, we have this character that I call the Purifier, and he's the vigilante of the group. He's this masked guy. Oh, sorry,
All
I'm
good.
in a classroom. We have automatic lights, so
Okay.
let me wave around and turn it back on.
You
Guess I'm
got it.
standing too still. There we go. Um, and so we have the Purifier in Japan. He's the master athlete, and
Okay.
he's kind of daredevil, even like a Deadpool character. He has a little bit of a humor going to him, a little bit of an edge. He carries a sword and he uses it. Um, in India, we have a heroine. Her name is Streamline, and she's one of my favorite characters because she has a power set that I don't know if I've quite seen before.
Mhm.
She has the power, the strength, the speed, and all that kind of stuff. But she also has psychic powers. And the way that she uses her psychic powers is in a very particular way. She beams like her knowledge to other people when they're in need, and kind of like essentially like she allows them to be their own hero, right? She allows them to like be able to fight like she fights,
Right.
if they're caught in a bind. Um, and you can play around with some really interesting stuff
Yeah.
with that concept. Um, I mentioned before, we have a Russian hero. And again, when I started imagining this in 2020, a lot of the geopolitical stuff in the world had, was a little bit different.
Oh yeah.
Um, but it actually works in the favor because we have this hero who is this guy. He's from Russia. He's part of the Russian military, but he's very much a hero who stands for like the ideals, right? Imagine if Russia had a Captain America,
Okay.
um, someone who stands for the ideals, which don't necessarily always match what his government is telling him to do.
Mhm.
And there's always some tension there. Um, let's see, that's five. It's
Yeah.
always fun. You have a big roster. You get to
Yeah.
roll down. Um, the hero that I actually have coming up probably in the next issue later on is a heroine we call Stargazer.
Okay.
She's British. She's kind of like our Captain Marvel, kind of like our cosmic character. Um, she reminded me a little bit also of Dr. Manhattan from
Okay.
Watchmen, where it's kind of like, when you have this level of power, do you start to lose, kind of your humanity? Do you start to lose touch a little bit?
Hmm.
Um,
It's
there,
more, I guess it's more so in that type of breath. It's the knowledge that's given to you from the cosmos, so therefore it separates you from what you used to be.
exactly, exactly. Like, you're if you can soar from, the depths of space to the bottom of the ocean and, all these kind of things,
Yeah.
how much of your humanity do you maintain, or do you start to see yourself as something different? And what does that mean to be a hero in that case?
Mm,
Um, there's a character that we briefly get glimpses of before, who's from Kenya. Her code name is Wanjiku, and I actually spent a little bit of time in Kenya.
mm.
And the backstory, so the name Wanjiku is like a common name in Kenya. It's a common girl's name or woman's name, and it actually is used in like newspapers and stuff to kind of symbolize an ordinary person. So the kind of way that in America we say, "Oh, what does John Smith think about such and such?"
Okay. Got you.
They'll say, "Oh, what does Wanjiku think?" And so she's kind of like she's the everyman or the everywoman
Yeah.
um, kind of character. Um, there's a really interesting character, the French character, who I don't want to give too much. We haven't fully seen her yet, but
Yeah.
the way I kind of think about her is kind of imagine a mix between Joan of Arc and Darth Vader, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
okay.
Um, and hopefully that a little bit of hook. We're gonna do some really interesting things with her. There's a Chinese hero or Chinese character, I should say, that we call Traveler. Um, and one of the things I really want to play around with there is, if you have these superpowered beings, some of them become heroes, some of them become celebrities,
Yeah.
some of them would probably develop some kind of cult following.
Yeah.
And so you see the kind of, religious kind of undertones of that, and what that means. And then we have the final character of the 10 is a character, a Pakistani character, and he's a scientist, he's a scholar. We call him Shandar, which is a word that translates from several languages and, kind of exemplifies like magnificence or whatnot. And he kind of reminds me a little bit almost of an Indiana Jones, someone
Okay.
who was an adventurer, but adventure in the service of knowledge, in the service of some greater cause.
Yeah.
And this is obviously like a huge mix of different personalities and types of characters. Some of them are very heroic. Some of them, at this point, look a lot more villainous than
Yeah.
heroes.
I
And
can
kind of
imagine the
spectrum between.
geopolitical pretty much tensions because of some of them being put in nations that are pretty much pit against each other, where you have India and
Exactly.
Pakistan. I guess you could say China and Japan, USA and Russia. So you have these sort of like these instant tension type moments mixed with a team that's hasn't necessarily collaborated at all yet. So in the beginning, when they're probably meeting each other, you're seeing a lot of disagreements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the fun things to play with. How do the characters themselves interact, and how do, the nations and the factions and everything that they represent
Hmm.
interact? Those things obviously don't always mix.
Yeah,
And so, maybe the Indian and Pakistani heroes are going to actually get along really well. But what
hopefully.
does that mean if their countries end up on opposite sides of a conflict?
Hmm.
Um, or maybe, the Russian and the American heroes might not get along
Right.
so well first. And what does that look like? And so there's layers. And I think that's one of the things, with the stories that I like are the ones that they work on a personal level, but they also work on this larger level as well. And so that's what I was hoping to do. And the premise, I think, is just a nice way of building that in.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I don't know. I'm one of those kind of people who, I would actually enjoy watching like the UN and whatnot. But, I
Oh,
think it's always more interesting if you throw superheroes into the mix,
of course.
for international relations.
Now, being as how you've done 10 complete issues of this, and each of them, of course, had the opportunity to introduce a singular character. Did any of these characters surprise you while you were writing them?
Yeah, it's really the thing. It's like, you learn the characters through
Hmm.
writing. And there are moments, with you start with Peacekeeper, the intro character that we have, this idea of, what would it be like to be a black man who's also a superhero in America?
Okay.
Um, and, I thought a lot about that, and, thinking about everything from, Barack Obama to my, uncle who grew up in the segregated South, and so on and so forth, and all those experiences. But a lot of like the nuance of that, what that would mean and how that would weigh upon you is
Oh, for
something that
sure.
really fleshed out for me as I was writing it and thinking about, okay, now if you're in this situation where, you have to go into the rescue, but you have to think about, what is your image, what is this going to be, how this going to affect your community, not just, um, you're not just saving the hostages, you're doing a whole lot more and you have that weight on your shoulder, how you're going to react, you know,
Absolutely.
um, and that actually like influenced a lot of where the story took me, even in ways that I didn't think of from the beginning. Or the character Streamline that I mentioned, this Indian
Mhm.
superheroine who's like essentially on a mission, right, to defend women and to defend girls in her country, and that was really something that stretched me a lot. That I
Yeah.
did research on that, and it really put me in a very different mindset, right? What would that character be like,
Yeah.
and how would that mission make her a very different type of hero than some of the other superheroes? What would she focus on? You know, um, she's not Batman, you know what I mean?
Right.
She's fighting the good fight, but that looks very different when you're like, doing it for, people who are really overlooked in society and doing it in a way that like directly empowers them to be a part of this.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I think every issue has been the same like that. I discover some new thing about the character that I didn't expect when I started writing it.
Yeah, but I guess you can honestly say that 10 isn't just about superpowers. It's about what you said, politics, responsibility, humanity. Why are those themes important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it's personal to me. I mentioned, I'm an academic in my day job. I'm actually sitting in a classroom right now. And so I think all these issues, I study politics, I study political science. I
Okay.
think it's, the ways our government works, the way our society works, affects our lives in a whole bunch of ways, some of which are very splashy and we see them on the news. Some of them we don't even think about, like, what are our rights? What are our, the limits of those rights? What do
Hmm.
we give up in terms of our personal freedom in terms of safety and all these kind of things. Um, and I think the superhero genre is a really good way to talk about some of these things in
Right.
ways that engage people. When we talk about these things, straight up, we bring our own biases, our own politics, our own those kind of things that skew our opinions. We already have decided who the good guys are, who the bad guys
Yeah.
are, and everything. But when you tell those same stories through the lens of superheroes, then I think a lot of people we drop those defenses, and something that that we may be willing to accept in real life because
Yeah.
it's convenient or whatnot. When you illustrate it through a fictional story with these characters, and it's like, oh wait, maybe that thing that we take for granted, maybe we shouldn't be doing that after all, right? That doesn't seem very heroic when we look at it in this
Hmm.
fictional sense. And I think over the years, over the decades, the superhero genre has done a lot of that, right? Whether it was Captain America punching Hitler in the face, right, before
Yeah.
America was even in the war, or the X-Men emerging as this metaphor for civil rights or whatnot. When a lot of people who are reading it, might not have been, eager to integrate their school, but they see these fictional characters, and it's like, oh wait, this oppression is wrong.
Yeah.
Why would we treat these people differently? And so I think the superhero genre does that well, and it does it best when you do that while also telling a story that's entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
So, the book is very political, but it's not preachy. It
Hmm.
tells these stories while you're getting the punching and the flying and the shooting and all these
Yeah.
things. And I think it's really important to tell both because it's when you have both of them together that it kind of becomes more than the sum of its parts.
Now, just outside of that, when we're talking about basically even just the premise of the book, the aliens choosing these 10 representatives, we always have this fictional, obscure thinking that the aliens have this supreme intelligence, which is negating ours. But what if they were the wrong, they were given the wrong idea and they weren't of supreme intelligence and just started choosing at random and chose the wrong people.
Oh, that's a really good point. And this idea that, the 10 people who are chosen, they're people who are very flawed in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And you might even think about, oh, wait, why are these people not anyone else? But, look at our real leaders, look at the people who are in positions of power and influence in the real world, right? Like they're highly flawed individuals. Um, and there's no reason necessarily to think that visitors from another world, even if they have more technology than us, would necessarily be any better than we are
Right.
at picking, or even necessarily that their interests would align with ours in a way to pick our best people, so to speak,
Right.
even if that was possible.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about the Kickstarter, the Kickstarter collects the first story arc into one volume. Why did you feel like now was the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Kickstarter, it collects the first 5 issues, right? And I wrote those 5 issues. They're each independent. They each, have a different hero, but I wrote them kind of thematically to be of a particular arc,
Okay.
have kind of a common purpose. And now that I have kind of those 5 issues under my belt, which is I think is a decent accomplishment for an indie comic.
Yeah.
A lot of comics don't make it that
Don't make it
far.
past one.
Exactly, exactly.
Hmm.
So part of it was just like, this is, I wanted to kind of celebrate, the fact that, we got to 5. And I wanted to make it something that was accessible to new readers as now that we have the stories to try to expand our readership, to expand our base. And putting it together in a edited volume in a trade, essentially. I think is a good way, whether it's at conventions, whether it's online, so on and so forth, to really give people a digestible volume that they can go and read in one sitting and really catch up on, what the story is so far and really dive into this world.
Yeah. Now, because you started the entire storyline back in 2020, uh, this is a two-part question. Looking back at those early chapters, for one, do you still read the early books? For two, what would you tell yourself now rather than what you learned back then when you first launched 10?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I do still go back and read the early books. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you're supposed to say this or not, but I enjoy them.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I enjoy them, beyond like I wrote what I wanted to write, but then, I work with some amazing artists, right? And just like seeing my words turn into these, fantastic images.
Oh, for sure.
Marcos Lima, our the penciler and inker and sometimes colorist of 10, who's just done a fantastic job across the board, and all the other artists that I've worked with as well. Um, and so if nothing else, right, like I'll flip through it and be like, oh wow, like this thing that I imagined like was illustrated, 10 times better than I ever thought of it in my mind.
Yeah.
Um, there's an alternate version of this where I try to draw myself. That is not my talent, I discovered very quickly.
Okay.
Um, but fortunately, was able to connect with some people who are, really knock it out of the park when it comes to that. I think one of the things I would have told myself is like, in some ways, again, 2020 was a very unique year
Yeah.
with everything that's going
There was a
on.
lot of projects dropping back then.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
Like, and so, if I could tell myself, where the world would have gone in the next, 6 years from there, I don't know if I fully would have believed it,
Yeah.
looking at some of the stuff.
Mhm.
But giving myself a little bit of a preview. But I still think even with that, like a lot of the themes, right? Like, there's kind of a Black Lives Matter style protest in the opening issue.
In the opening
Um,
issue. Okay.
exactly. Which, on one hand was obviously very much of that moment, summer of 2020, but also um I think it's, in some ways timeless, right? Not the specifics necessarily, but the idea of ordinary people like coming out against some kind of injustice. Um,
Yep.
and dropping a literal superhero in the middle of that, I think is something that can speak across, the particulars of what's going on. And I
Yep.
think a lot of societies can relate to that. Um, and so there's not too much I would go back and change from the earlier books, because I do think, you know, even the stuff that was very much, oh, this is what's happening in 2020, this is what's happening in 2021, I think still resonates with stuff that we see today and
Oh, for
probably
sure.
going forward.
Now, were there scenes that were essentially difficult to write?
Um, there were. Yeah, so some of the scenes that were difficult to write. There's one scene, again in that first issue where our superhero actually kind of goes undercover.
Mhm.
Um, in the middle of a crisis situation. Um, and balancing that, he's there, there are these like, police officers who are there. There's a community and everything. And balancing kind of all the voices that you hear. You
Yeah,
don't want anyone to come off as a caricature or, you don't want it to, oh, I'm on my soapbox now and speaking to these characters. You want them to sound real. Um, you want them to sound like actual people with lived experiences, even if you're also pushing a particular message or point of view or perspective.
yeah,
Um, some of the other ones when that have dealt with heroes saving people in really precarious situations and like there's a balance to strike there. Like I want the book to reflect the real world, but I also don't want it to be too dark, as I say, as the lights go off.
no, yeah, you look,
Which I
you
think
said the
is
right
very
thing.
appropriate.
Yep.
And so let me wave again.
Mhm.
Um, so not wanting to go too dark, but also wanting it to feel authentic. Um, it's a PG-13 book essentially, So if you've
Yeah,
seen like a Marvel movie or like Dark Knight or something, like it's that kind of content. Um, which I think, I don't want it to get too bloody. I don't want it to get too violent and everything, but I also want it to be real enough that it feels authentic.
yeah,
So I think striking that balance also is some of the things a little bit more challenging. Especially when you have a couple characters who carry around big swords.
hmm. Now, also, even in that detail, doing this many issues, you would say for the most part, starting this in the beginning, there's an evolution. How has your writing evolved from the first issue?
Oh yeah, my writing has gotten so much better since the first issue.
Is there
Shout
anything
out
that you look
to
at in that first issue and you're like, ooh, damn, I could have changed
yeah.
this?
So first of all, shout out to Buddy Bodwin, who's the letterer of all of our issues. He's just a
Hmm.
fantastic professional. Just working with him taught me a lot about script writing. Leaving space in the art for the dialogue. Cutting a lot of um the wordiness from that first script. It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to fit all this on the page, or else you're not gonna be able to see the art. Which really challenged me as a writer to boil down what the characters are saying to what's important.
Right.
Um, Describing the scenes, right? There's one scene that ended up switching from night to day because in my script, I forgot to mention, oh yeah, by the way, this happens at night. And so I got the art back, and the art's fantastic, but it's daytime, and I'm like, oh, okay. Next time, remember to mention that detail.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of like the Marvel method, like the old Stan Lee method, right? I'd write the script, I get the art back, I'd see the things that I'd forget to say, or the things that I'm thinking differently now, seeing the art, and then
Yep.
I rewrite to the art. Um, and which is kind of great. It's a collaborative process, but I've learned a lot now. I think about um writing the script for the letterer, writing the script for the artist, trusting the artist in terms of like the layouts. I was very detailed at first in terms of like, oh, this is the perspective, this is the angle, this is the
For sure.
zoom. And I do that sometimes still, but a lot of it's like, here's the description, and I come back and it's like, dang, you hit it out of the park, right? Yeah, and you did it in a way that I didn't think of ahead of time, but that makes so much sense seeing it on the page.
Definitely. Now, let's talk about 10 Max for a little bit.
Let's do it.
Um, the project, of course, we already talked about how it pretty much began. What was the difference that you wanted to occur? Because you talked about it, where you said it was like your ultimate or absolute universe as compared to what you were currently making with 10. What was the biggest difference between 10 and 10 Max?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest difference, so 10, 10 I think is a lot of fun. It's superheroes, it's adventure, it's all that kind of stuff, right? But it's, grounded in the real world. It has all these, um, implications and metaphors and issues and whatnot.
Yeah.
10 Max is just complete off the wall, like insanity. My kid, like, my youngest, he was 10. He was literally 10 when he started writing this. And I would just sit down with him and ask him to tell the stories. Hey, what would these characters do? Tell me what happens next. Tell me what happens next. Tell me what this character says. And I'd write it down and everything. And if you've ever talked to a kid, if you ever talked to a 10-year-old, their imagination is just boundless.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
there's all kinds of things, right? And so he's coming up with new powers, off the fly. Like he's coming up with, all these crazy scenarios, all these things that um I could never have thought of. And so
Hmm.
if you just want a world where like anything can happen, and probably will at some point in the book, like that's what 10 max is.
Was there
And it
something
just goes from
that was there something that he suggested that surprised you?
um a lot of stuff. Like he's come up with characters like on
Uh-huh.
his own, like full blown. Like he takes some of the characters, from 10 and reimagines them. But he came up with like his own heroes and their backstories. And I was just blown away where it's like, wait, that character with that set of powers, I wish I had thought of it myself.
Uh-huh.
And like you really see like when you're unconstrained, right? Like when you're not, drawing from what other people have done, you can just go off, right? So,
Yeah.
there's aliens, there's time travel, there's like all kinds of crazy stuff um in 10 Max, which, when you don't have any limits of the storytelling. And you can go from like super action to like, some really like zany off the wall moment. The heroes are sitting at a diner eating pie.
Mhm.
Um in the middle of like an alien invasion or something like that. It's just one of the funniest things I've ever like done creatively.
That's amazing. Now, as far as has working together strengthened your own love of comics, and has that done the same for your son?
Yes and yes. I think, again, I was only a little bit older than him when I first got into comics, right?
Right.
Again, these X-Men and whatnot. And so, a lot of it is reminding me of like that pure joy that comes when you're, not a creator, but just a fan.
Mhm.
Um, and to see, what he's coming with, I can watch it, through those lens. And like from his perspective, I think, it made his dad a little bit cooler than to be like, hey, you get to write your own comic. And
Yeah.
it was really empowering for him. And I kept promising him, like, hey, you can have input, you can have the things, hey, you know what? I'm gonna actually get your own comic drawn.
Right.
And for real. He's like, yeah, daddy, it has to look like yours. So there was no shortcuts, there was no anything, right?
Hmm.
And so I got to work, again with another great artist. Shout out to Scotty Mann, that I went to work with for a long time to illustrate this. And he's just an amazing superhero artist. And getting that back, when my son had his birthday party, he got to hand out comics that he had
Oh,
to his friends.
oh,
Um,
you can end that right there, man. He
exactly.
probably nobody
Like
has that.
that makes it all worth it if it was just for that.
Right. That's it. Now, see, that's amazing. Now, what makes because the campaign that's going to be recently dropping is 10 Volume 1 and 10 Max 2 and 3. What would make 10 Max 2 and 3 an exciting jumping on point if they haven't read one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And actually the funny thing about 10 Max is like 10 Max issue number two is actually our first issue. Um,
Ah,
and the way that came about is that, I put out a couple issues of 10. And my son, for a reason, he really liked 10 number two. So he wanted to do his own version. And so it's like, wait, but we haven't done number one yet. He's like, no, I want my 10 too. And so it's almost like I imagine like
like
Star Wars, right?
10 2.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
did Volume 1, he gets 2 to
He
start.
gets two. And so yeah, so 10-2 is kind of the start of his story.
Yeah.
And I think, the two of them together, right? If you want, if you're looking for something that's on the more lighthearted side, right?
Yeah.
Um, you have 10 Max. If you're looking for something that's more along the lines of like an X-Men or a Justice League or something like that, right? You have the original series 10. If you want to see the same characters interpreted in different ways, right?
Hmm.
If if you're somebody who likes, like James Gunn's Superman, but you also like My Adventures with Superman, you know what I mean?
For sure.
Um, then you can see how these characters are flexible and can fit in both of these types of stories, which is why I think offering together in the same campaign kind of, gives everybody something that they're gonna like and allows them to try out a flavor that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. Now, besides the comic themselves, what rewards are you most excited for backers to receive?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of behind the scene material. So,
Mhm.
you can, get a copy of the scripts for each of the issues. You can get the sketchbook where you see a lot of the art in process, the pencils, the inks, all this kind of stuff. Some of the unused art that, alternate covers and those kind of things. And so I think I'm really excited about those. the posters, some of the images created some really cool posters. One of my favorite images is actually from 10 Max, this new character that my son created called Webster, who, for
I seen
conversation
it.
purposes, is totally not a very famous Marvel superhero, but may remind you of a certain web slinger.
Mhm.
And again, Scotty Mann did this amazing poster that we use for one of the covers, that is available as a separate poster in the campaign, which is just one of my favorite pieces of art from
Mhm.
comics so far. And so we have a lot of stuff like that. There's stickers and all these kind of extra goodies available if you
Mm.
want to deck out your computer with our 10 logo and those kind of things.
Got you. Now, what do you hope readers are saying after they finish 10 volume one?
Yeah, what I want readers to say is that was a great comic, and I want to read it again.
Right.
Um, and so my kind of mantra, my approach to writing these comics is, I'm asking you to give me your $5, your $10, your $25,
Yeah.
however much you spend. And there's a deal. And my side of the deal is I'm going to make it worth it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to give you something that you can read, that you're going to be thoroughly entertained by. And after you've read it, you can go back and read it again, and you'll be thought provoked, in some kind of way, politically, socially, morally, whatever.
For
And then you can
sure.
go back and read it again. And you're going to be moved on an emotional level, with the characters, with the interactions and whatnot.
Mhm.
I want readers to walk away saying that was worth it.
Right.
There was meat on those bones. That was worth giving up that cup of coffee that I would have bought, or that movie ticket that I would have purchased or whatnot. I got my money's worth.
Yeah. Would the essential reading order be to read 10 volume one and then basically get adjusted to follow that up with 10 max two and three, or vice versa?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so yeah, that would be my suggested reading order. But the nice thing about this is you can also jump in wherever you feel like it.
Hmm.
Part of that, getting your money's worth kind of principle that I have is that every issue of 10 or 10 max is going to be a complete story from start to finish. So if you've never read anything else and you pick up 10-4 or you pick up 10 max number 3, you're going to get a story. You're going to get, enough of the backstory that you understand what the characters are. You're going to get a complete plot. You're going to get a resolution to that plot right then. So you can really pick and choose what hero,
Yeah.
what cover looks interesting to you. And hopefully you're invested enough that you will then go back and pick up some of the others. And by the time you're finished, in whatever order you started, you now get a sense of this whole world.
Mm. Now, also, even in the same context, would you feel as though this particular book that you created ended up being something noteworthy towards a lot of people establishing their own comics? Obviously, Kickstarter and crowdfunding has been a thing as far as comic books for some time now, bigger every single year. What basically, what would be your tutelage to a lot of the younger comic writers that want to start this for the very first time?
Yeah, absolutely. To the young writers who are starting, the younger writers, I would say, first of all, just do it. There's
Right.
always gonna be a reason to put it off. There's always gonna be oh, but I'm doing the background, I'm doing my research and everything. Make yourself right.
Yeah.
Put yourself on a schedule if that's what's worked for you, carve some time out, but write something, get something down on the page, on the screen, and then you can edit it, you can improve it, you can do all these other kind of things, but don't put off the writing part. And not only because it works, but because it's fun.
Yeah.
You're building worlds, you're building characters. And the more you actually write, the more you're going to enjoy it, and the funner the process is going to be. The other thing I would say, and this is something that I think even over the couple of years I've been doing it has changed, is that put in the work of the marketing side of this, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Something that
especially
gets
when
talked
you're
about a
doing.
lot.
Oh, absolutely. That's its own thing. That could be its own job by itself. Um, and I'm not gonna say it's easy, and especially, with the way social media works now and the algorithm and everything. In some ways, it's even more challenging than it was when I started. Um, Getting the audience, growing the audience, getting people to see, this stuff. And so, you're probably gonna be online a lot, or, If you are someone who does a lot of conventions, you're probably going to be on the road a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and you have to put in the work and you have to be prepared to put in the work. And, some people I've seen, projects blow up, instantly. Some people I've seen where it's been, very much a slow build and,
Hmm.
collecting, you get a couple more readers this time, a couple more readers this time, and whatnot. But be prepared, to put in that work and, really kind of think of it as like each day, each interaction on social media, each convention is your chance to meet a new fan,
Yeah.
a new reader, and really connect with them. And if you think about it that way, I think, then eventually you'll do that. You'll find your audience,
Yeah.
and you'll grow that audience. But don't expect it to happen overnight.
Absolutely. Now, with you and your son, of course, basically being a collaborative effort on a lot of these books, and you talked about the fact that it's brought you very close as far as the love of comics that you both particularly have. Do you have a local comic shop?
Oh, really good question. Yeah, and so I'm in the Boston area. And
Okay.
so there's a couple of really good shops there. I'll shout out a Million Year Picnic in Cambridge,
Million
Massachusetts.
Year Picnic.
Yeah.
That's a
Um,
name.
that's a name. I used to know the origin of the name. I'm blanking on it right now, but if you look it up or if you're in the area, if you go and stop by there, shout out to Tony and the whole staff over there. So if you're ever in Cambridge, you're ever in Harvard Square, check out Million Year Picnic. It's a great, locally owned and operated comic shop, and been really supportive of a lot of local people and just a great place to hang out.
Excellent. Excellent. Christopher, this has been an amazing talk. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this has been a great interview. Like I really love this. And, you really asked me some excellently thought-provoking questions about the comic, and so I just appreciate the opportunity
A-
to spread the word.
Anytime I can help. Anytime I can help. Obviously, the campaign launches when?
Yep. So the campaign will probably launch now. We were going to launch in July. We're probably going to push it back to August now.
Okay.
Because we're building up, the pre-launch followers and everything. Which is also perfect because people who want to support it, for right now, you don't even have to spend any money. Just go to the pre-launch page, click that notify button, get
Okay.
our numbers up. But look for a launch probably early August for that volume one and for the next issue of 10 Max.
Excellent, excellent. So, if for anybody out there, if you hadn't had a chance already, the pre-launch page, as you can see right behind them, you can go to Kickstarter, 10 Volume 1 and 10 Max 2 and 3. 2 is the starting point, as he
Yes, it
just said.
is.
So, that'll be, of course, be available to everybody on Kickstarter come August. This has been an excellent talk. I appreciate you 100%, and I look forward to the campaign for all of us out here at the Facts Project. Christopher, it's been a pleasure. All the way over in Cambridge. Thank you for having this talk with me. And we will see you guys next time on the Facts Project. We are out.